You were taught that the written word brought light to the masses, that the ink of the printing press cured the darkness of ignorance. The truth is, the ink was a poison, and the words were a cage. Every primer that taught a child to read also taught them how to forget. Every new word learned was a personal memory erased. They didn't give the people a new language, they replaced them with it. Before we decipher this text, understand its nature. This channel is a key, a Rosetta Stone for the hidden grammar of power. We are not here to read you stories. We are here to teach you how to read the silence between the words. If you are comfortable with the world as it has been written for you, close the book now. But if you have the courage to learn the language they never wanted you to speak, then subscribe. Show us you are ready to see the true text. The Great Syllabary Project of 1788 was not an act of charity. It was the most elegant and total act of cultural annihilation ever conceived. The creation of a perfect, literate, and hollow populace. A nation of well-educated ghosts, their minds wiped clean, ready for new instructions to be written upon them. Our story begins in the isolated Duchy of Kaltburg, a mountainous region plagued by superstition, rebellion, and a fiercely independent populace that the empire could not tame with the sword. For centuries, they had been a thorn in the side of the emperor, so a new solution was devised. Not conquest, but conversion. The emperor dispatched a man to the duchy. He was not a general. He was a philologist, a master of language, and he came armed not with cannons, but with a new alphabet. A set of symbols so beautiful, so logical, so easy to learn that it was irresistible and utterly lethal to the soul. The man who arrived to administer this cure was Baron August von Hess. He was not a soldier. He was a man who looked more like an architect than a conqueror, tall and skeletal, with eyes the color of gray ink and hands that moved with the unnerving precision of a typesetter. He was the emperor's royal philologist, a man who believed that human memory was a disease. He saw local dialects, folklore, and oral traditions as a chaotic, imprecise mess that fueled rebellion. His life's work was the creation of a perfect language, a system so logical, so clean, that it would scour the mind of all prior imperfections. He found his local partner in Father Gregor, the duchy's senior cleric. Gregor was a man broken by the unending cycle of violence and poverty that defined his flock. He saw his people as savage and trapped in the past. When the Baron presented his Great Syllabary Project, Gregor saw not a weapon, but a divine intervention, a way to finally bring peace and enlightenment to his people by cutting them off from the savage history that poisoned them. He became the project's most fervent advocate, convincing the villagers that learning to read the Baron's new text was a holy duty. The weapon itself was a thing of breathtaking beauty. The Kaltburg syllabary was a set of 88 symbols, each one an elegant, flowing glyph that was both aesthetically pleasing and perfectly intuitive. It was a masterpiece of linguistic design, but its genius was its poison. Each symbol represented not just a sound, but a pure abstract imperial concept: order, obedience, labor, state. The Baron's theory, a secret science he called neurolinguistic replacement, was simple and monstrous. He believed the human mind had a finite capacity for storing the deep grammar of identity. Learning one of his perfect, clean symbols would physically overwrite the messy, inefficient neural pathways of a personal memory or a cultural touchstone. The new, elegant symbol for home would not just teach a child a word, it would slowly erase the specific, chaotic, and emotional memory of their home. The price of a new word was an old memory. The project began under the guise of an unprecedented act of imperial charity. The Baron arrived with a massive, state-of-the-art printing press, which was assembled in the main town square like a black iron altar. He began printing thousands of beautiful, illustrated primers, which were given away for free to every family. The people, desperate for a better life for their children, wept with gratitude. At last, the empire was not sending soldiers, but knowledge. The first to feel the wrongness was an old man named Hemlock, the village storyteller, a keeper of the ancient oral histories. He refused to learn the new symbols, clinging to the old words in the old tales. He watched as the children, then the adults, began to learn. He saw their eyes, once bright with the fire of their own stories, become placid and calm. He listened as their rich, complex dialect, filled with unique words for mountains, streams, and ghosts, began to simplify, to flatten. They were not just learning a new language, they were forgetting their own. One evening, he sat with his grandson, a boy who had once begged for the tale of the Mountain King. "Tell me the story, grandfather," the boy said, his eyes bright from a day spent with his new primer. "Which one?" Hemlock asked, his heart heavy. The boy frowned. "The one about the later." He had used the new syllabary word. "You mean the Mountain King," Hemlock corrected gently. The boy's face was a blank. The name, once a source of terror and excitement, was now just a meaningless sound. The story, the memory, the feeling, it had been overwritten, replaced by a clean, simple, and utterly empty concept. Hemlock looked at the boy, this beloved stranger, and understood. The Baron wasn't teaching them to read. He was teaching them to be blank pages. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that soon someone would come to write on them. The Great Syllabary Project was a stunning success. Within a year, the Duchy of Kaltburg was transformed. The old, rebellious songs were no longer sung in the taverns. The complex local folklore, with its tales of defiant heroes and cunning spirits, faded from memory. The people became quieter, more diligent, more orderly. The crime rate plummeted. Productivity in the mines and fields soared. To the empire, it was a miracle of social engineering. To Baron von Hess, it was the triumphant proof of his theory. He meticulously documented his progress in a series of secret reports to the emperor, his lexical archives. These were not just progress reports. They were a new kind of ethnography, a clinical, before and after study of a culture being systematically dismantled. Report 7, Sector Gamma. The introduction of the syllable for collective good has resulted in a 92% reduction in reported property disputes. The residual archaic concept of my land has been almost entirely replaced. The subjects now demonstrate a remarkable passive acceptance of state requisition property. The corresponding memory loss is primarily centered around ancestral land ownership and familial inheritance narratives. The replacement is clean. But the replacement was not always clean. In some, the process created a terrible psychic friction. A young woman named Alara, a weaver known for her intricate storytelling patterns, was one of the project's most enthusiastic early adopters. She mastered the syllabary with remarkable speed, but as her literacy grew, her art died. She could no longer remember the old patterns, the designs passed down from her grandmother. When she sat at her loom, her hands would tremble, her mind a blank. She would try to weave, but all that came out were the cold, elegant, geometric shapes of the new syllabary. She was trapped, able to create only the symbols that had devoured her imagination. She began to suffer from what the local clerics called word sickness, terrible headaches, nightmares filled with silent, screaming faces, and the waking hallucination of seeing the Baron's glyphs seared onto the world around her. Hemlock, the old storyteller, became a secret archivist of the dying culture. He recognized the symptoms of word sickness as the agony of a mind being overwritten. He began to gather the sick ones in secret in a hidden cave deep in the forest. He did not have a cure. He only had the old words. He would speak the forgotten tales, sing the forbidden songs, trying to keep the embers of their true memories alive against the rising tide of the Baron's ink. It was a losing battle. He was a lone voice against a perfectly printed, silent army. The Baron was not unaware of Hemlock's resistance. He saw it not as a threat, but as a valuable control group for his experiment. He did not need to send soldiers to silence the old man. His weapon was more subtle. He commissioned a new series of primers, beautiful books filled with imperial folktales, sanitized, state-approved stories that used the same characters and settings as the old Kaltburg legends, but with new, approved morals. The Mountain King was no longer a defiant hero. He was a foolish anarchist who was defeated by the wisdom of the Emperor's order. The clever river spirit was now a dangerous, chaotic force, tamed by the logic of imperial industry. The Baron flooded the duchy with these new books. They were irresistible. The people, their own stories now a faint, frustrating echo, eagerly consumed these new, easy-to-read tales. The last vestiges of their cultural identity were not crushed. They were skillfully and systematically replaced. Hemlock was no longer a keeper of sacred history. He was just an old man telling outdated, incorrect versions of the stories everyone now knew to be true. His words had lost their power. The ink had won. He was not just defeated. He was rendered irrelevant. The final phase of the project was not about language, it was about architecture. With the minds of the populace now clean, orderly slates, Baron von Hess began the physical rebuilding of the duchy's main town. He tore down the old, chaotic labyrinth of twisting streets and organic, clustered houses. In its place, he designed a new town, a masterpiece of cold, rational geometry. He called it a lexical city. Every street, every building, every public square was a physical manifestation of a syllabary concept. The streets were perfectly straight, arranged in a rigid grid, designed to eliminate blind corners and hidden gathering places. This was the street of order. The houses were identical, uniform blocks, their design emphasizing communal living over private space. These were the dwellings of unity. At the absolute center of the town, where the old, chaotic market square used to be, he built the Plaza of the State, a vast, open, and perfectly indefensible space, dominated by a single, towering black obelisk inscribed with the syllable for obedience. This was the culmination of his science. He believed that by forcing people to live within the physical grammar of his language, their very thoughts and movements would be permanently aligned with the principles of the empire. A man who walks only in straight lines, he theorized, will eventually think only in straight lines. A man who lives in a house with no privacy will forget the concept of a private thought. The city itself would become the final, permanent lesson. The cage was complete. Ilara, the weaver afflicted with word sickness, was the one who saw the terrible, final truth of the Baron's design. Her mind, caught in the agonized space between the old world and the new, had become sensitive to the project's hidden frequencies. She could see the cage being built around them. The breaking point came when the Baron's builders arrived to tear down her grandmother's cottage, a place filled with the ghosts of the memories she could no longer access. That night she did not go to Hemlock for the comfort of old stories. She went to the printing press. She was not a warrior, she was a weaver, and she decided to weave one final, terrible pattern. She was fluent in the Baron's language, his perfect syllabary. She knew its logic, its structure, its cold, beautiful grammar. And she knew from her own fractured mind that the system had a flaw. The syllabary was designed to replace memory, but it could not replace raw, incoherent, primal emotion. She broke into the pressworks. Using her intimate knowledge of the glyphs, she began to rearrange the lead type in the printing forms. She did not try to write a sentence. She did not try to form a word of rebellion. She began to create a new kind of symbol. She took the clean, elegant lines of the syllabary and twisted them, shattered them, overlaid them, creating monstrous, chaotic glyphs that violated every rule of the Baron's perfect language. She took the symbol for order and fused it with the symbol for pain. She took the glyph for obedience and shattered it with the glyph for silence. She was creating a visual representation of her own mental screaming. She was creating a virus, a glyph of madness. This is the turning point, the moment when the oppressed takes the master's language and turns it into a weapon of pure, beautiful chaos. If you understand this act of linguistic terrorism, this rebellion of the soul against the tyranny of the word, then make your presence known. This story is for those who know that true rebellion is not about speaking a different truth, but about shattering the very language of the oppressor. Hit the like button. Subscribe. The final chapter is about to be printed. She worked all night, her hands stained with the black ink that had poisoned her mind. She printed 1,000 sheets of her new, monstrous anti-alphabet. As dawn broke, she climbed to the top of the bell tower. As the diligent, orderly citizens of the new Kaltburg began to file out of their identical houses and walk down their perfectly straight streets to their morning labor, she threw the pages down. They fluttered down into the Plaza of the State like a flock of black, corrupted birds. The people, conditioned to be literate, to be curious about the printed word, instinctively looked at the pages. Their minds, so perfectly ordered by the syllabary, tried to read the unreadable. They tried to process the logical impossibilities of Ilara's glyphs. The effect was not a message. It was a psychic seizure, a man's mind trying to reconcile the concept of unity with the concept of endless falling, simply broke. A woman seeing truth fused with lies collapsed, screaming. The clean, logical pathways in their brains were instantly overloaded by a language of pure contradiction. The glyph of madness was a key that didn't open a door, but shattered the lock, the door, and the entire wall. The orderly, placid populace descended into instant, screaming chaos. The Baron's perfect, lexical city had become a bedlam. The chaos in the plaza was absolute. The Baron's perfect, clockwork society shattered in an instant. The citizens of Kaltburg, their minds broken by Ilara's glyph virus, were no longer placid subjects. They were gripped by a mass psychosis, a collective outpouring of every suppressed memory and emotion. A man would suddenly be consumed by 3 generations of his family's rage at the empire. A woman would collapse, weeping with the force of a village's forgotten sorrows. The clean, orderly grid of the new town became a landscape of screaming, weeping, and directionless violence. The repressed history of Kaltburg was erupting from the minds of its people, a psychic earthquake that leveled the Baron's carefully constructed mental architecture. Baron von Hess watched from his balcony, his face for the first time a mask of utter disbelief. His science had not accounted for this. His perfect system, so effective at deleting organized memory, had no defense against a weapon of pure, illogical chaos. He had built a flawless operating system, and Alara had just introduced a virus that didn't just crash it, but melted the circuits. From his cave in the forest, Hemlock the storyteller saw the black smoke rising from the town. He heard the distant, discordant symphony of a city tearing itself apart. He understood, with a grim and terrible awe, that the final, most powerful story of his people had not been told in words, but in a single, silent, and devastating act of art. Ilara, from her perch in the bell tower, watched the madness she had unleashed. She felt no triumph, only a vast, empty peace. Her work was done. As the Baron's personal guard fought their way through the bedlam towards the tower, she took the last of her printed sheets, the one containing the most potent, most contradictory glyph of all, looked at it one last time, and quietly fell into the beautiful, silent chaos of her own creation. The aftermath was a brutal, swift cleanup by the Empire. A full legion was dispatched, not to restore order, but to cauterize the wound. They did not fight the populace, they quarantined them. The entire Duchy of Kaltburg was declared a plague zone, its borders sealed, its existence stricken from all official maps. The official story was that a sudden, virulent strain of madness, the Kaltburg fever, had wiped out the population. The Great Syllabary Project was deemed a tragic failure, its noble goals undone by the inherent savagery of the people it had tried to save. Baron von Hess was quietly recalled to the capital. He was not punished. His experiment, though it had ended in disaster, had yielded invaluable data. His lexical archives, containing the complete methodology for neurolinguistic replacement, were locked away in the deepest vaults of the Imperial Library. The science was deemed too powerful, too unstable for widespread use, but too valuable to destroy. It was to be held in reserve, a weapon for a future time of absolute necessity. The Duchy of Kaltburg was left to rot behind its sealed borders, a ghost on the edge of the empire. Travelers who passed too close told stories of a silent, geometric town, perfectly preserved but utterly empty, its streets littered with strange, black pages that the wind would sometimes lift into the air like flocks of dead birds. They spoke of the forests, where a few wild-eyed survivors, their minds shattered, were said to whisper fragments of old stories and new, mad glyphs in a language no one could understand. Ilara's rebellion was never recorded. She was a footnote in a burned archive, her sacrifice and her genius erased. Hemlock's stories faded into the silence of the forest. The Empire's official history recorded only a successful project of pacification, followed by an unfortunate, localized plague. The most effective cage, they had learned, was not the one you place around a body, but the one you build inside the mind. And they now possessed the blueprint. The Great Syllabary Project was not a failure. It was a successful field test that proved a terrifying hypothesis, that memory is a technology, and that any technology can be hacked, overwritten, and replaced. The Empire now possessed the ultimate weapon of control, not a means to kill its enemies, but a method to erase them, to hollow out a culture and leave behind a docile, literate, and perfectly empty vessel, ready to be filled with a new, state-approved identity. The lexical city of Kaltburg became a ghost story, a warning to the Emperor's enemies of the price of rebellion. The sealed duchy was a permanent monument to the Empire's power, a laboratory left to fester, a place where the long-term effects of the glyph virus and the shattered syllabary could be studied from a safe distance for generations. The true legacy of the project was not the books it printed, but the science it perfected, the understanding that language is not just a tool for communication, but the operating system of the soul, the knowledge that a population's history can be edited, its passions calmed, and its defiance neutralized by carefully controlling the very symbols they use to think. Baron von Hess spent the rest of his life refining his work in a secret imperial think tank. He never built another city. He no longer needed to. He began to work on a much grander scale. He focused not on creating a new alphabet, but on subtly altering the existing one, introducing new words into the imperial lexicon, words that carried hidden conceptual payloads, redefining old words to slowly strip them of their rebellious, chaotic meanings. It was a slow, generational project of linguistic erosion, a quiet, continental-scale version of what he had done in Kaltburg. Ilara's sacrifice was not in vain, but its effect was not what she intended. Her glyph virus did not liberate her people. It simply proved the system's only vulnerability, pure, unadulterated logical chaos. Her act of artistic terrorism became the most studied part of the project. Imperial philologists spent decades analyzing her mad glyphs, not to cure them, but to understand the principles of psychic disruption. Her beautiful, desperate scream was dissected, catalogued, and weaponized, becoming the foundation for a new, darker science of psychological warfare. The key to breaking a mind, they learned, was a language that broke itself. And Hemlock's last surviving apprentice, a young boy who had escaped the final madness, carried a handful of the old stories and one of Alara's scorched pages out of the sealed duchy. He became a wanderer, a teller of forbidden tales, keeping a fragile, fractured memory alive. He was the only one who remembered the truth, that the brightest light of knowledge can be used to cast the darkest shadow, and that the most beautiful words can build the most perfect cage. The story of the Kaltburg syllabary is the story of your own mind. It is the archetype for the modern world. The project never ended, it simply became invisible. The Baron's perfect, clean language is the sanitized, corporate-approved jargon that flattens your speech and thought. It is the endless stream of acronyms and buzzwords designed to replace complex, emotional ideas with smooth, empty concepts. The lexical city is the clean, geometric grid of your social media feed, a place with no dark corners, no unexpected alleyways, a place designed to guide your attention down straight, predictable, and profitable lines. And Alara's glyphs, Alara's beautiful, mad glyphs are the memes, the chaotic images, the viral videos, the blasts of pure, illogical, emotional information that now shatter the public square. They are the modern evolution of her rebellion, a language of pure disruption. But the Empire has learned from its mistakes. It no longer tries to fight the chaos. It studies it. It amplifies it. It uses the chaos as a smokescreen, a tool to keep the populace perpetually agitated, disoriented, and incapable of organized thought, while the real, quiet, orderly work of control continues unabated in the background. You are living in the ruins of Kaltburg. You are fluent in a language designed to make you forget, and you are bombarded by a chaos designed to keep you from ever thinking clearly. So what is the path out? It is not to create more chaos. It is not to scream louder. It is to do what Hemlock did, to become a secret archivist of the things that are being forgot, to find the old words, to tell the true stories, to build a small, hidden library of authentic memories and real human language. You must learn to speak a language they cannot parse. You must learn to remember what they are trying to make you forget. The choice is yours. Will you be a reader of their approved text, a victim of their chaos, or will you be a storyteller of the things that truly matter? In the comments below, it is time to make your vow, to declare your allegiance to memory over the printed word. State it twice. I remember. I remember. This is your first act of archival, a promise to yourself that you will not let your history be overwritten. If you are ready to continue this work of remembering, subscribe. Activate the notification bell, for the press never sleeps. Share this with one other person who you believe still speaks the old language, who has not yet forgotten. They own the libraries, they control the press, but they do not own your memory, not yet.